The sun hung fiercely over the barren stretch of land, a cracked, desolate expanse that seemed to stretch endlessly to the horizon. It had once been fertile, a thriving source of life for the surrounding villages, but over time, misuse and neglect had drained its vitality. The land had stagnated, its potential wasted, until only dust and decay remained. No one came to this place anymore. It was a graveyard of ambition and effort. A monument to what happens when systems fall into stasis, when motion and productivity stop. But one man saw something different. Seth the Wise, as the villagers called him, understood something they did not. His silver hair and weathered face belied a mind that had spent decades mastering the principles of growth and economic ecosystems. He knew that an economy, like any living system, must either expand or contract. There was no middle ground. Stagnation leads only to decline, and to stop moving forward is to invite collapse. Standing at the edge of this desolate land one morning, Seth gazed out over the cracked soil. He felt the earth suffering but knew that beneath the surface, there was potential. Where others saw death, he saw the possibility of rebirth. "I will make this land abundant again," he murmured. But he knew that abundance was not a momentary condition. It had to be built on the principles of constant activity, of continual productivity, and of perpetual increase. Seth began by assessing the land not just for its deficiencies, but for its potential energy. Every ecosystem, he knew, was a complex system of forces, a balance of inputs and outputs. But balance did not mean stasis. In nature, balance comes from motion, from the continual flow of resources, of energy, of life. Inactivity leads to stagnation, and stagnation to degradation. The first principle, therefore, was balance through motion. He studied the contours of the land, identifying where water once flowed and where it could be made to flow again. He understood that the soil had lost its nutrients through overwork, and that life had fled when activity ceased. He set to work redirecting water, not just to feed the soil, but to activate it, creating hidden reservoirs beneath the surface that would keep the land constantly hydrated. He planted native grasses, whose roots would slowly heal the soil, bringing it back to life. But even this was not enough. These grasses would also attract insects, birds, and microbes that had long since abandoned the barren ground. They were the agents of motion and change, critical to revitalizing the earth. Weeks turned into months, and though the land looked much the same, Seth could feel the subtle shifts beneath the surface. The grasses, tiny though they were doing their job. They clung to life, coaxing nutrients back into the soil. Life was returning, not quickly, but steadily, in a system of perpetual activity. The land was learning to breathe again, to circulate life and resources. With the balance restored and motion returning to the soil, Seth turned his focus to the second principle, diversity. But diversity in this sense was not simply about variety, it was about constant productivity. In nature, nothing remains idle for long. Every part of an ecosystem has a role, and every role contributes to the overall productivity of the system. Without continuous activity, the system will collapse in on itself, losing vitality and shrinking into disarray. Seth gathered seeds from far and wide, fruits, vegetables, legumes, flowers, and trees. Each plant was chosen not only for its yield but for its ability to contribute to the whole system's ongoing productivity. Some plants enriched the soil with nitrogen, feeding the next generation of crops. Others attracted pollinators, creating a self-sustaining cycle of growth. Some repelled pests naturally, protecting their neighbors without the need for human intervention. The villagers, watching from afar, were confused. Seth's planting looked chaotic, disordered, tomatoes growing beside marigolds, beans climbing corn stalks, sunflowers marking the edges of the fields. But Seth knew better. His design was one of constant activity. a system where each element played a role in keeping the whole productive. In this ecosystem, nothing would stand still, nothing would cease to contribute. Every part of the land was alive, working, and moving toward greater abundance. Soon, the first green shoots appeared. Small at first, they were quickly joined by more, until the entire plot began to hum with life. Each plant, each insect, each blade of grass worked in harmony, driving the system forward. Seth smiled, knowing that his design ensured continual productivity. The land would never again fall into stillness or decay. The transformation of the land was only the beginning. Seth knew that a farm, like any economy, must continually expand. Stagnation, whether in crops or in trade, leads inevitably to contraction and collapse. The villages had been struggling for years, relying on outside imports and dwindling resources. The barren land had been a symbol of their stagnation. But Seth's farm was a new opportunity. He did not keep his knowledge or his harvest to himself. Instead, he opened the farm to the village, teaching them the principles of constant productivity. He explained how economic ecosystems, like the natural world, must expand or they will shrink. Just as plants must continuously produce, so too must the economy. He bartered his crops, exchanging them for services, goods, and labor. He taught the villages how to diversify their own efforts, how to invest in productive activities that fed into the larger economic system. The village, which had once been in a slow spiral of decline, began to grow again. Small businesses sprouted, fueled by the abundance from Seth's farm. Artisans crafted goods from surplus crops, selling them in nearby towns. Markets flourished, and with them, the village's sense of identity and purpose. The economy did not just revive, it expanded, pulling the entire community into a cycle of continual growth. Seth knew that growth had to be perpetual, that no system could stand still without falling into decline. He designed his farm not only to provide for today, but for the future. He built irrigation systems to ensure a constant supply of water. He taught the villages how to save seeds from the most productive plants, ensuring that each generation would be stronger than the last. He encouraged them to expand, not just in size, but in scope. As time passed, the farm did not merely sustain itself, it flourished. Each year, the harvest grew more abundant, the systems more efficient, the soil more fertile. The once barren land became a perfectly systematized farm, not just self-sustaining, but ever-increasing. The village's economy, too, expanded alongside it. What had begun as a simple plot of land had now become the engine of an entire economic system, feeding growth and prosperity in an endless cycle. Years after Seth had passed, the villagers gathered at the farm to celebrate the harvest festival. The farm had become a symbol of their collective prosperity, a living embodiment of Seth's teachings. His principles, balance, diversity, constant productivity, and expansion, had not only transformed the land, but the economy as well. The village, once shrinking into obscurity, was now thriving, its economy growing with each passing season. Seth's wisdom lived on in the cycles of growth that continued to drive both the land and the village forward. There was no stagnation here, no stillness. The farm was always in motion, always producing, always expanding. In the world of growth, there was only one truth: an economy must move forward or it will contract. And here, in this once barren place, the movement toward abundance would never cease. Thus, from the barren soil, Seth had written a story of perpetual growth and prosperity, one where expansion and increase were not goals, but constants, woven into the very fabric of the land and the people.